Hello, good morning or good afternoon. It is Sunday, so we're having another conversation about job seeker questions and just a conversation. I am broadcasting from my YouTube channel, which is Jessica Hicks on YouTube, and then I am also broadcasting on Twitch and LinkedIn. I'm going to get started into the conversation. Really, what we're talking about is what questions are employers not allowed to ask in job interviews? And the reason why I decided to talk about this today is because, there's a lot of information that people will offer up before even being interviewed. They will offer up information that employers really aren't privy to, and it really does not matter in the case of whether you're qualified to do a job or not. And this is offered up when you're putting information in your resume and also during the job interviews. There have been different occasions where I have heard of situations where people were asked inappropriate questions during a job interview. So during any job interview discussion, most questions should be related to the job. Now, you're going to have some niceties, you're going to have some conversation, how are you doing? How's your day going? Plans for the weekend, whatever, hopefully you're doing well, all that nice stuff. But what I'm going to talk about is questions that can seem harmless, but they're actually not legal to ask if you are in the United States. There's a lot of different scenarios we have in the United States, right? So there are protections in place for job seekers to help job seekers make sure that they're not being discriminated against because of some type of demographic information that they're either consciously openly providing for the interviewer or the interviewer is actually asking a person. So that's what we're going to get into. I'm going to also take a look at the comments if you have thoughts on this. I did put a poll into the chat on YouTube asking about if you've ever had an experience where you were asked an inappropriate question. And it happens. I have been asked an inappropriate question. We're going to get to that towards the end of this conversation. But yes, I have, as a recruiter, as an HR professional, I myself have been asked inappropriate questions. So it's affecting a lot of people. So I see the chat. I'm not seeing it in Restream for some reason, but hello, Barry. Welcome. Shout out to my member, Barry. Shout out to my member and moderator, Edward. And shout out to Victoriously Shay, my member. Welcome. Nice to see you all. Shay, you're listening all at work. Okay, well, that is fitting. All right, so let's jump into this. And again, this is being broadcast on LinkedIn, YouTube, and also Twitch today. So really any demographic information is what employers should be staying away from during job interviews, right? So age, race, ethnicity, gender, marital status, some other demographics that, kind of when you think of demographic information, what you actually give information on your census and things like that. Education, employment, income, those are okay, right? You can be asked about your education. Like, do you have a degree? Do you have a high school degree? You can be asked that question. And you can be asked about your employment status. Are you currently working, for example? Now, what can you not ask about? What's the juicy stuff that you cannot be asked about? And we're going to talk about some different scenarios on the question. So race and ethnicity. This is an easy one that people should know that you shouldn't be able to ask these questions. A lot of times, if I'm during an interview, you're going to know, once I get on the phone with someone, they may not know my, race necessarily, but once I'm in an in-person interview with them or I am meeting them in a video chat, Zoom or Microsoft Teams, whatever, they're going to recognize that I am a Black woman. However, someone cannot just directly ask you, what's your race? What country are you from originally? Your name is, let's say I'm talking to someone by the name of Roberto. Your name's Roberto. Is that Spanish? I mean, you can't ask those type of questions during an interview. And this could happen. Someone could be like, oh, you have, your last name is this. Are you French? And it sounds harmless, but it can be inappropriate because you're getting into that demographic information. Now, you also can't directly ask a person, are you a US citizen? You can ask people about their work authorization. You can ask, are you eligible to work in the United States? This is a question that's pretty common. You can ask, do you require any type of work sponsorship? You can ask that, but you have to be, as interviewers have to be really careful with how they pose that question. So the other thing that relates into race and ethnicity that could sound harmless is, are you a US citizen? It sounds harmless. However, you can get into some ethnic information with that. Oh, so you aren't a US citizen? Well, we can't move forward with the job. So are we being discriminatory against people that are not US citizens? So it gets kind of tricky. You wouldn't think it, but it can be. Now, you can ask, are you able to speak a foreign language? If it relates to the job. It should relate to the job. This is the point of this conversation. The questions being asked during a job interview, they should relate back to determining if you are fit for a job or not, right? It should match the requirements of the job. It should be confirming a lot of those things that they're saying, that a company's saying in the job description. We need a person that does X, Y, and Z. Those are the questions that you should be answering. It shouldn't be, are you Trinidadian? No, that doesn't matter. It does not matter, so you should not be asked those type of questions. All right, the next one is, it's okay for people to ask. As a recruiter, I can ask you what your current address is. I can ask you where you're currently located. Now, this is kind of, it's a little weird because it can get to the same information. Let's say someone is in India. Well, the reason I can ask that question is a lot of employers in the US, we are only set up to hire people in the US. So that would get into the question of, can we even actually hire you, pay you, etc. So that is why we can ask that question. Even within the states, there are certain states that certain companies can operate in. Let's say I can only operate in Texas. This company is only set up to hire people in Texas. Well, I need to know where you're actually located within the US as it relates to the job, right? And then the other thing that I wanted to point out that you cannot ask about in terms of language, I can ask, can you speak a foreign language, right? As it relates to a job. What employers should not be asking is, what's your native language? Because again, that can give up your ethnicity. Well, native language is Spanish, and I was born in Mexico, and da 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 da. Employers don't need to know all that information. It's interesting that during my job interviews that I have with people, oftentimes folks will just offer up this information. I've had candidates tell me their age. I don't need to know that information. I've had people tell me if they're what their ethnicity is. I don't need to know that information. However, if you are offering that information, that's okay. It's just not that the employer can ask that information. And hello, Spiky, welcome in. Nice to see you. Hello, Harold. Howdy from Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome. Let me know if you have had some experience or if you were asked something that felt weird, but you weren't sure if it was inappropriate or not. So I'm going to move on. So age and health. These are not questions that a person should be asking you during a job interview. Just shouldn't happen. So I can't ask the person, how old are you? However, I can ask if you're over the age of 18, because in the US, that's typically a requirement, right? You have to be over the age of 18 to work in most places. I can ask you about your career goals. That may give me some insight into your age. It can, but it's not direct, right? It's not directly saying, so how old are you? Are you over the age of 40? Are you 50 years old? I'm 50. Are you 50? It can sound like a conversation and harmless, but it's inappropriate to just ask someone directly those questions. Harold Fisher is saying I'm just an old fart. I can't with the comments sometimes. Oh my gosh, you guys are funny. So can't ask you about the age, Harold. We can't ask you that. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because for recruiters and hiring teams, there are certain jobs. Like, for example, I was working at Purina, Nestle Purina, and for a period of time, I was interviewing forklift operators, production operators, different folks that were working our factories. And those are more physically intensive jobs. So we would require people to carry things or load things, right? Lift a certain, weight. So employers can ask this, it does kind of get into the age health scenario a bit, but it's not direct. But we can ask you if you're able to lift 50 pounds because the job requires it, right? Can you meet that requirement? Again, we're getting to the fact that it has to relate to the job at hand, those requirements. So we can ask, can you perform the physical requirements of the job? That's something we can ask, right? And I'm looking down because I'm looking at my notes because I want to stay organized in this video. And then health, as it relates to health, drug use. Now, this is going to be interesting as we see things play out with the use of the Mary Jane. The Mary Jane, let's see how things progress there, with California and different states. So different states may have some different requirements, especially as we go along over the next course of the next years. But you can ask about illegal drug use. You can ask that. You cannot ask about prescription drug usage, right? So if you have a prescription for something, maybe you have a disability, that is not information you need to share. The employer should not know about any disabilities or anything unless you're offering up some information. So in the case, maybe someone is offering that they need a reasonable accommodation because of something. Well, that's something that you can share if you're comfortable sharing that and you are needing a reasonable accommodation. You want to make sure that employer can provide, what you need in that work environment. But I cannot just be like, hey, are you disabled? Hey, you're having trouble hearing me. Or do you have a hearing impairment? Like, I should not be asking those type of questions. Okay. So those are overall the questions that you may see in job descriptions. And when you're doing an application, you may see the question about reasonable accommodation. That is there because we want to know, as an employer, what we can do to make sure you're able to work, right? And Nestle Purina was actually really great at that. And so kudos to them for really taking that at hand and making sure that folks felt comfortable and could do whatever the job it entailed, whether they had a disability or not. Okay, so I'm looking at this comments before I move on. Spiky X said, so why do they ask you in applications, do you have a disability? This is self-identification information that is self-identification. You do not have to say yes or no, right? This information that Spiky's relating to, he said, so why do they ask you in job applications, do you have a disability? This is for more of the employee records. So for them to be able to capture and also report to the government, because a lot of companies are, they have government contracts and are required to report to the government on their applicants and who they're hiring. Now, that is information that will be in the background. I will not see, as the recruiter, I won't see the information. So if you're saying, yes, I need a disability, I'm disabled, I need a reasonable accommodation, whatever, there will be a designated person that typically does the reporting that can see the disability information. I can see if you need a reasonable accommodation. As a recruiter, that's something I need to know. Your disability status, I don't need to know that, right? So that's an interesting question. That is why it's more from a reporting standard. It's not for an individual person. Oh, Spiky has a disability. We need to know that. No, it's for reporting. So if you're going down that list of questions, there's some questions they ask. For example, what's your ethnicity, right? self-identification. You will notice in those questions, you can either say, mixed race, Black, Asian, et cetera, right? And they have a little explanation there. There's also, I do not wish to self-identify, or something around that. I do not wish to respond, something like that, right? They ask you about your veteran status. You can always say, I do not wish to. With the disability question, there should be a section that says, I do not wish to, right? And then you sign off on it. That is a government requirement. It's not something a recruiter will see. So don't be afraid if you're looking at that information that the recruiter is going to see it and go, oh, we don't want any more, Black people here, so we're going to pay. You're not getting the information sent to the recruiter. I'm just using that as an example. Not that I've had an experience where that has happened. I've seen some weird stuff online someone sent to me where people have said that behind the scenes. But at the company I've worked at, I have not experienced that. Thank goodness. Okay, so hopefully I answered your question, Spiky. Hopefully I answered your question. So Harold is asking about the jab. Now, that is going to be interesting because I think it may depend on the state. For example, in Texas, our governor here has implemented that employers can't terminate someone because of their status or whether they got the jab or not. So that is still kind of being determined. But generally, from what I've been hearing in the HR community, most employers are saying, look, we need to know your status for the job, so we're going to ask that question. But I haven't really seen a lot of people asking in my circle. So I think it depends on what industry you're in, Harold. But it's interesting too that people I've talked to, I'm not asking that question about whether they got the jab or not. However, there have been a percentage of people that have just offered that up and said, hey, I got my jab and this time and I'm good to go. I can come to the office, etc. I do think there will be requirements in other states, I'm going to say outside of Texas, where if you're coming into the office, I'm seeing that there are criteria you need to meet, including either you getting that test of whether you have, the cough. That's what I'm going to call it for sake of YouTube, or if you've gotten a jab. So more to come. There's a lot of litigation happening around that, so I don't want to say yay or nay on that one too soon. Arizona is recreational, but the employers here don't give a flying fig, Newton. You better not test. You better not test positive. Yeah. Let's see what other comments are in here. They will ask you if you have a disability, if it is relative to the job being offered. So that disability question on job applications should be pretty much across the board for companies that have government contracts, because they're required to ask you. But during the actual job interview, like me as the recruiter, again, I don't see the disability information. I don't see if you said that you're Hispanic. I don't see if you said that you're male or female. I don't see any of that. Me, Jessica, as a recruiter, and other recruiters will not see that. That is background information. So in the applicant tracking system, I will not see that. However, during a job interview, obviously, I'm getting all that information. So I cannot ask you directly, hey, you got a disability? That's not actually legal to do. Let's see. Where I work at, I'm the only Black person in GM stocking. So, again, like ethnicity is going to be obvious in a lot of cases, but there are cases where it's not too obvious, right? Maybe you're a mixed race person. You're ambiguous. It's not clear to anyone what you are, what your background is, or your ethnicity, where you're from originally, right? Hey, talking with Tommy D. Oh, you're wondering if your card is making you lose opportunities? That's interesting. So again, employers can ask about if it is an illegal drug where you're located. They can ask. They can test. You can do it. You can do drug testing and whatnot. However, my note on that is that there are also companies that are selling the Mary Jane. So if you're into that, you might want to look at those companies. Just saying. Just say I don't personally do any of that, but just putting that out there. All right. I don't think I've covered this just yet so far, but obviously gender, family status. And I think this is one that folks don't think about, but your gender, whether you're male or female, if you've always been male or female, your what your gender was at birth. These are questions that an employer should not be asking during an interview. That they should not be asking that. Right? Now, again, it is a different story when the job candidate is offering that information of saying like, hey, I transitioned this year and this and that. You don't have to give that information away. I actually recommend you don't share so much of that information, especially earlier on in the process. But it's your choice. It is your choice. But just know that the company, whoever is asking those interview questions of you should not be asking that, right? The other thing that I think is interesting gets into women protection. Your marital status, whether you're single or you're married. Are you planning to have children? Interviewers cannot ask you, hey, you're planning to have kids anytime soon? Because, that thinking is, and this has happened in the past, where employers have denied women jobs because they think that they're going to have children. They don't want to, have them work and then leave. Or they have children, they're assuming that the woman can't work a certain amount of hours, or they can't be a manager because it's going to require them to work this day and that day or whatever. But you can ask the person, let the person actually answer for themselves whether they can work certain hours, right? What their career goals are, what they're wanting. So you can ask about, are you able to work certain hours? That's fine. You can ask again about career goals. What are you looking towards that way? But you cannot ask, hey, are you married? Hey, you single? And that gets into some interesting stuff too, because why would you be asking a person if they're single? Right? It's interesting. Edward says, I have to know a person's ability to do the job. There's a way to ask questions to ascertain this. Exactly. There's a way to ask that is not inappropriate and that gets straight to whether the person can do the job or not. Right? So there's that. And I think I missed something. Let me just go back to my note earlier. Sorry for the ruffling of papers. Attendance. So about age and health. Again, you can't ask someone, oh, are you over 40? I don't know if you can do this job. Can you lift this much? You look like you're 70. I don't think you can do this job. You can't say that. So if an employer is saying things like that, that's not okay. However, you can ask about, like, when it comes to healthcare, someone can't be like, oh, did you take a lot of sick days when you were at such and such company? Not okay. However, they can ask about your attendance, right? And that gets them the information they need to know, right? Have you had any attendance issues when you were at such and such employer or during your work history? But you can't ask, do you take a lot of sick time? You can't ask that. And I'm saying this because I have heard some horror stories. And look, I just want folks to know their rights as a job seeker. I do not want people to just think those type of questions are okay. And I think it's fine to let the interviewer know, like, that is an inappropriate question. That is a legal question. I'm not going to answer that. Alrighty. So the last one that gets into my personal example is religion. Ooh. You would think this one goes without saying, being in the United States and knowing the history of the United States, but religion, you can't ask someone, what is your religion? Where is your place of worship? Are you Christian? Right? Because again, it gets into, does this relate to the job? Is there a possibility to discriminate because of this information? And I was actually asked this question in 2019. Some of you know the story. I had been laid off, and I was looking for a job. I ended up getting multiple offers within a few weeks of searching for a job, and ended up joining someone that I had previously worked with because they said, hey, come work over here with me. And during this process, I interviewed with a place because someone referred me to this company that will remain nameless. And I will say that I tend to make people pretty comfortable when they're talking with me. And I think that's a great thing. However, this interviewer, who's the head of the company, felt very comfortable in asking me, had asked a series of questions that I guess he was prepared to ask, and then had some time left and was just, a little nervously saying, well, what religion are you? I'm just like, oh. And luckily, he realized that was wrong and said, oh, I'm not supposed to ask that question, am I? And I said, no, you're not. You're not. But it actually proved a lot of what I was thinking, that there needed to be some HR assistance within that company, because a good HR manager would have said, hey, we're going to do this training. These are questions you can't ask. Stay away from this and that. Now, I have to admit, it was a religious organization in a sense. So when it comes to those religious organizations, because you may want to work for maybe a health organization that is, St. Mary's or St. Luke's or something, and they may have certain missions and values that are pretty much in place where it reflects the Christian faith. Well, what an interviewer may ask you would be, have you looked at our mission and values? Is that something that you think that that resonates with you, or something of that nature, right? Because it's not uncommon for companies to ask, have you read our mission and values, right? Or which value stands out the most to you? Those questions are okay. But directly asking, hey, what's your religion? Are you Christian? Are you Muslim? What's going on here? That's not okay. So I'm kind of saying this in a lighthearted way, but it is serious. There are questions that are illegal to ask candidates during a job interview. So I hope this is helpful. Hopefully you've gotten something out of it. I'm going to just take a little quick peep at the comments just to make sure I didn't miss anything. But good discussion. I'll have to do a follow-up when it comes to the jab questions. I thought that question would probably come up today, but it's a little tricky because of the federal guidelines versus the state guidelines. And again, you guys know I'm in Texas, so it's a little different down here. It's a little different. But ultimately, I personally think that the health questions should be off limits. That's my view. The health questions, because you get into this dynamic of, okay, what's okay and what's not okay. Well, if I can ask this, why can't I ask this? So generally for me, I stay away from any health related questions. That's just my personal view on it and how I feel. Alrighty. This was a good discussion. Thank you all for joining. Thanks for the folks on YouTube that I can see. And if you're joining on LinkedIn, consider joining me on YouTube. I generally like to see the comments over here. It's normally a good discussion. I didn't take a look at the poll. Let's see. Folks didn't answer my poll. Did it just not show up on YouTube? What's going on? No one answered the poll. That helps me out sometimes, just so I can get a pulse check on what's going on with everyone. Like, what have you been experiencing in the past as a job seeker or as a current job seeker? Edward says, you're correct. Sometimes it's about how you phrase the question. Exactly. And, the interesting thing is, a lot of times we can get the information, right? So when it comes to ethnicity, obviously you're going to see that I'm not a white woman, right? When it comes to gender, a lot of people would think that, I'm clearly, my name is Jessica, I'm clearly a woman. But in today's world, right, there are folks that have transitioned to a certain gender. And so there are protections in place for those people to not be, asked, well, when did you transition? Or are you really a woman? Or asking all these insensitive things. during an interview, right? Again, it doesn't relate to the job. Doesn't really matter. Oh, you can't see the poll, Victoria Shay is saying. And Edward says, oh, that's so interesting. Maybe it's not pinned to the comments. I can see it. Ah, interesting. Maybe it goes away after the video is posted. But thank you for letting me know that. I'll know for the future. You can't see the poll. Hey, Partly Cloudy, welcome in. We are just closing things down. I am looking at the comments, trying to see if I answered all of the questions in here. And I believe I did. I think I did a good job today with the chat. Let me pop over to LinkedIn just in case. LinkedIn is the new sharing. I'm not completely used to sharing out on LinkedIn. So let's see. Okay, I don't see anything on LinkedIn, so I'm going to close things down. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion. Hopefully it can help someone. If you know someone that is actively looking for a job, please let them know this information, because I don't want people to be caught up in a sticky scenario where they're feeling uncomfortable answering certain questions when they can really just say, hey, that question is inappropriate. I'm not going to answer it, and should feel entitled to do so because they have that legal right. I also want to put a disclaimer. This is as it relates to the United States. So I don't know regulations in United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, these different countries, right? But here in the United States, we do have these protections in place. Thank you so much for watching. I am going to close things out, and I appreciate you being here. Have a great